Mosaic, a daily news program from Link TV, presents a selection of news reports from independent and state-controlled broadcasters from throughout the Middle East.
Hundreds of Hamas movement members celebrated its huge victory in the Palestinian legislative elections. They demonstrated at the Al-Aqsa Square in East Jerusalem as well as in Gaza.
The
Hamas movement has not settled down, and they continue to celebrate after their huge victory in the Palestinian legislative elections. There were celebrations in the Al-Aqsa Mosque Square after Friday prayer service. Green Hamas flags were raised and the Palestinian flag was placed on a pillar at the mosque. Banners were raised calling for a government headed by the movement. These peaceful demonstrations are considered to be the first of their kind at this place. In the Gaza Strip, Hamas organized a massive celebration, singing songs in praise of the legitimacy of the elections, which placed the movement in the Legislative Council and now comprises the majority. Speakers called for not associating the movement with terrorism.
Stop making statements and remove our name from the terrorist list.
Nearby, Fatah movement members demonstrated in front of the Legislative Council in the center of Gaza City, calling for the resignation of the leadership of the movement after it lost in the legislative elections. The protesters called for a change of leadership in Fatah, while at the same time pledging their loyalty to the Palestinian Authority and President Mahmoud Abbas. The demonstrators raised yellow Fatah flags and some fired shots into the air. Then they headed towards Abbas's home, which is hundreds of meters from the Legislative Council, expressing their support to the Fatah president.
The Palestinian chief negotiator Saab Arakat said Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas will ask Hamas to form the new government after winning the legislative elections. The Hamas movement announced that it will soon begin intensive negotiations with Fatah and other factions for the new government. However, Arakat confirmed that Fatah will not participate in the new government, which will be formed by Hamas. Rather, it will form the main opposition.
Hamas was taken by surprise by its landslide victory, and now it is being asked to form a new government. Fatah, which faced big defeat, decided to form the opposition. These are the main signs of how the future political scene will look like. The results of the elections proved that the Palestinian people favored the resistance path, voicing their opposition to the peace process under American and Israeli terms. Hamas has its own vision of how the situation should be. Still, its participation in the political game in the framework of the Cairo Agreement dictate that it will have to change its political line, at least temporarily, in order to pass the new phase successfully. Being successful in the new phase demands Hamas put an end to making unilateral decisions and to build political partnership with the rest of the Palestinian factions and form a unity government. This will help Hamas establish a dialogue with the international community and persuade it of the legitimacy of the new Palestinian leadership. From this perspective, Hamas's call for other factions, including the Fatah movement, to form the new government is actually intended to achieve international legitimacy. However, Fatah seems to be disinterested and does not want to respond to Hamas's request to join the national unity government. Fatah wants to temporarily stay away from politics and reconsider its history and learn from the lesson of these elections that will always be a turning point in the Palestinian political life. By taking this position, Fatah essentially wants Hamas to fall on its face, because it knows that the challenges facing the new government are very challenging, both at the domestic and international levels, not to mention the international reservations concerning the election results. In addition, Hamas will now be under the constant watch of America and Israel. What is sure is that the new Legislative Council will be very different from the old one, both in policies and performance. Regardless of the structure of the new government, it still has to deal with the same challenges, including the resumption of negotiations with Israel and the commitment to the cooling-off period that was reached in the Cairo agreements. Although the Hamas movement says that it will not negotiate with Israel, at least temporarily, it is impossible for the movement to maintain this position without the support of other Palestinian factions. Hamas needs their support in rejecting Israeli and American conditions that were introduced with the roadmap for peace, such as disarming the Palestinian factions, keeping in mind that if Hamas shows lots of inflexibility, it might become unpopular. Hamas is not the only one facing limited options. The international community is also bound to accept the new political reality, which is partially due to its positions that left the Palestinians with no choice but to fight the occupation by all means necessary.
بسبب سياساته السابقة التي لم تزد الفلسطينيين إلا إصرارا على مقاومة الاحتلال بما أتيح لهم من وسائل.
ومن الشأن الفلسطيني إلى الشأن العراقي حيث قال مصدر في
A source associated with the United Iraqi Alliance has confirmed that the party will choose one of its 4 nominees for position of the Prime Minister. In forming the new government, the Iraqi President, Jalal Talabani, has confirmed that all political groups and factions will take into consideration Iraqi national and constitutional rights, including voting privileges. He also expressed optimism that the new government will be formed within a month.
In constituting the new and permanent government, all political groups and factions in Iraq took into consideration Iraqi national and voting rights. They held a number of bilateral talks to find common grounds that may help them in forming the new government. The United Iraqi Alliance has won the most influential seats in the parliament. However, it has not yet picked a new prime minister. There are 4 nominees competing for that position. They are the Iraqi Prime Minister Ibrahim al-Ja'fari, the representative of the High Council of the Islamic Revolution Abdul Abid al-Mahdi, the representative of the Islamic Da'wah Party Nadim al-Ja'bari, and Mr. Hussein al-Sharihistani, an independent. Political leaders unanimously confirmed that Iraqi national and constitutional rights, including voting privileges, will not be taken lightly when it comes to forming the next cabinet.
The United Iraqi Alliance believes that it is more qualified than other groups to preside over the office of the Prime Minister. It is also more competent to govern and preside over the Ministries of Defense and Interior, which are the most crucial positions in Iraq.
The Iraqi Accord Front has confirmed that representations in the new government should be in accordance with election results and must reflect the voters' choice. Meanwhile, the Sunni Arabs have some reservations about a number of current government officials.
لدينا فيتو وخطوط حمراء نضعها وبشدة أمام الشخصيات السياسية.
We have reservations about some officials in the current administration. They should be impeached for human rights violations, corruption, money embezzlement, and incompetence in running Iraqi affairs. We will do everything in our power to stop them from taking part in the new government.
In light of the Iraqi status quo, the Iraqi coalition list believes that the only way out of this disorder is for the government of national salvation to proceed forward and take control of Iraqi affairs.
The only problem remaining is what these various political leaders wish to accomplish. Do they want prestigious ministry positions, or do they want to lead and serve Iraq? If they choose the latter, then they must work out a comprehensive and a clear political platform that wins the approval of the Iraqi people.
However, all these political positions are subject to change. This comes amidst a possibility that new alliances may emerge under the umbrella of the new parliament. Hussein Abdul Wahab, Abu Dhabi Television, Baghdad.
In Iran, amidst feelings of anger, thousands of residents from the city of Abbas held a funeral procession for the victims of the two latest bloody attacks in the city, chanting death to Britain and death to America.
Amidst an atmosphere of sadness and pain, thousands of residents held a funeral procession for the martyrs killed by Tuesday's explosions in Ahvaz, which left 6 civilians dead and injured 40 others, and resulted in material damage to 2 government buildings, the Saman Bank in Kanibars, as well as the National Resources Department.
These groups that carry out these attacks do not practice our beliefs. We tell these cowards who commit these savage acts that if you don't have a religion and don't believe in the Day of Judgment, to at least be free in your own world, because free people do not stoop this low and commit these kinds of savage acts.
Those participating in the funeral procession condemned these criminal acts against the innocent.
My son Jazim, he was massacred just like Imam Hussein. He lost his head and his hands were cut off, and his stomach was cut open and torn to pieces.
God damn them! God damn them!
Those participating called on the leaders to resist ethnic divisions in Kazakhstan, expressing their hope that the leaders would eradicate the roots of ethnic divisions so people would live in security and peace, as they had been up till now.
These hypocrites are misguided. All they can do is hurt us, the Muslims and the Arabs. They don't hurt the enemies.
The funeral procession for the martyrs of the Ahvaz explosions, which was attended by thousands of civilians and a number of officials, as well as a number of foreign media correspondents, were held under tight security measures to prevent another terrorist attack from taking place. Mohammed Hassan Shukbari, Al-Alam Television, from southern Iran, Ahvaz.
انتهاك المقدسات الإسلامية في بعض الدول الغربية والاحتجاجات في الدول الإسلامية.
Violations to holy Islamic symbols and beliefs in some Western countries, which created demonstrations in Islamic nations, will be the focus of the following report. Iraqis held demonstrations protesting Danish and Norwegian companies and media agencies for publishing caricature figures depicting Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him.
الشخص النبي الأكرم محمد صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم.
الاعتداءات الساخرة الأخيرة من قبل الصحافة الأوروبية على مقدسات.
The latest blatant attacks by the European press on Muslim symbols and beliefs added to the long anti-Muslim record of the West. The Danish and Norwegian governments have allowed their national companies and media to print caricatures of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, under the pretext of free press. But yet, this is another attack on Islam and human values and has angered Muslims all over the world. These blatant attacks also outraged people in Iraq and in other countries. Iraq's streets were filled with protesters expressing their anger towards the latest attacks on the principles of the peaceful religion of Islam and publishing the caricature images. Protesters condemned positions taken by both the Norwegian and Danish governments for not doing anything about the caricatures. The protesters demanded a formal apology from both governments for humiliating the Muslim nation. These attacks from the West on holy Islamic symbols come not only from media, but also from the European cinema, which was evident in the film by the Dutch filmmaker Theo van Gogh titled Submission, which contained an image of a naked Somalian woman with holy Quranic verses tattooed on her body. The repeated insults against Muslims in Western press are attributed by many analysts to the atmosphere created by the American and British governments after they declared war on the Muslim nation, civilization and history under the pretext of terrorism.
With us over the phone from London, we have Mr. Kalam Halbawi, the Muslim thinker and researcher. Mr. Kamal, do you think these Western violations are deliberate, and stem from anti-Islamic sentiments?
In the name of God, most compassionate, most merciful, peace and blessings over the Prophet. I think that these attacks are caused by several reasons. The first reason is due to the fact that many people in the West do not believe in religion or respect it. In their perspective, the religion of Islam is just like Christianity or Judaism. They are tired of all religions. This is the main reason, and it also shows that secularism is very dangerous because it puts religious symbols at risk, even in countries that claim civil freedom. If true freedom existed in these countries, then the rights, beliefs, and religious symbols must be respected under the blanket of civil liberties. Attacking others and their views is not freedom. The second reason is the fact that Muslims are going through a critical period of time in which they are accused of being terrorists. For example, Iran is accused of being a terrorist country because it is trying to develop itself and advance its scientific and research programs, including the nuclear program. This is how these ignorant people view freedom and the position of power among Muslim nations.
On his third day in the U.S., head of the Future Bloc in Parliament, Saad al-Hariri, held a press conference at the Woodrow Wilson International Center in Washington, D.C. The conference revolved around democracy in Lebanon and was attended by academicians, politicians, and journalists. Hariri said that all forces in Lebanon, primarily Hezbollah and Amal, had to place Lebanon's interest above all others for Lebanon's sake and engage in national dialogue in order to find solutions to crisis.
In the conference he held at the Woodrow Wilson International Center yesterday, MP Saad Hariri stressed that all problems, the question of disarming the Hezbollah most notably, should be solved through national dialogue. Hariri added that efforts to bring the boycotting Amal and Hezbollah ministers back to cabinet would continue, pointing that it was the first time that the government was Lebanese made.
I believe that all parties should believe in Lebanon, and most importantly Hezbollah and Amal. From the beginning, our whole discussion with all parties, we were saying that Lebanon comes first. Nothing comes before Lebanon. And if anybody comes before Lebanon, then they have a problem with the majority of the parliament. I don't believe that Hezbollah or Amal has the interest of other regional powers over Lebanon. I believe that their interest is Lebanon. There are problems and difficult problems to be resolved, and these difficult problems have been discussed, and for the first time in the country, these issues were open publicly.
Hariri further said the Lebanese people didn't want to revert to civil war to resolve their conflicts. He said if the national interest was placed before alliances, then problems could be solved. Hariri reiterated that there were no bargaining deals at Lebanon's expense, describing talks about a deal as wishful thinking. He also said that his meeting with American President George W. Bush was, among others, aimed at discussing the question of democracy building in Lebanon and thanking the U.S. for its support to Lebanon.
What we need to do is to strengthen our security forces. And one issue that we would be talking also in this on this trip is how could the U.S. help us in securing our borders, and because we need equipments for the military and for the internal security forces.
Hariri further considered that demarcating borders with Syria, starting from the Shib'a farms, was to Lebanon's interest and not Israel. He also stressed that there was no problem between the Syrian and Lebanese people, but in his words, the Lebanese people wanted to know the truth behind his father's assassination and wanted to see the perpetrators caught and tried. Accordingly, he described the words of Syrian former Vice President Abdel Halim Khaddam as very dangerous. The head of the future bloc is expected to meet with U.S. Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice before making his last stop, the White House.
The United States Foreign Affairs spokesperson Sean McCormack stressed that Hezbollah was a terrorist organization that the United States would not cooperate with. During a press conference held yesterday, McCormack said that the U.S. supported Premier Fuad Sanura's government, as well as other members of the cabinet who were democratically elected. Arab League Secretary General Amr Moussa said he did not carry a particular initiative to Beirut or Damascus, stressing that the purpose of his previous visits to both capitals was to see the different angles of the crisis. He said whatever position he adopted would only reflect the position of the Arab League. Moussa reiterated that there could not be any deals over the international investigation probing Rafiq al-Hariri's murder, because the investigation was working in accordance with Chapter 7 of the UN Security Council, which in his words was non-negotiable. Telecommunications Minister Marwan Hamedi said the presidential statement issued by the Security Council on Tuesday reflected a universal consensus that strongly supported Lebanese independence, sovereignty and free decision-making. After a meeting with U.S. Ambassador Jeffrey Feltman yesterday, Hamedi also stressed that the ministerial statement labeled Hezbollah a legitimate resistance for all Lebanese people. The American ambassador, in turn, hailed the UN presidential statement as a sign of strong international support for Lebanon.
Support by the United States for Lebanon is matched by strong support in the international community. In our view, the presidential statement issued by the Security Council a couple of days ago is a very, very important signal to the Lebanese people of how strong the international support remains with Lebanon. It's worth remembering that under the Security Council procedures, it's only possible to have such a statement if the statement is agreed to unanimously by all members of the Security Council. This is an important element of that support, is the international consensus to help Lebanon through its transformation.
The UN Security Council is expected to reach a decision in the next few days over extending the mandate of the United Nations Interim Forces in Lebanon, UNIFIL. The Council convened yesterday and discussed a draft presented to the Council members by France. The draft denounced the violations along the Blue Line and called on all concerned parties for self-restraint. It also suggested that the UNIFIL's mandate be extended for another 6 months, that the UNIFIL hold a common operation room with the Lebanese security forces, and that the Lebanese army deploy its army and security personnel in all Lebanese territory. The Lebanese government had already requested that the UN extend the UNIFIL mandate in an official letter sent to the UN Secretary General Kofi Annan on January 9, 2006. Last week, Annan made a recommendation that the Security Council extend UNIFIL's term for the period from July 22, 2005 until January 20, 2006. Annan based his recommendation on the fragile political and security environment which continues to prevail in Lebanon and the numerous breaches along the Blue Line. Five African leaders have asked Sudan to withdraw its bid to head the African Union because the appointment could sink Darfur peace talks and dent the group's credibility. Sudan has nominated itself to chair the 53-member AU based on a tradition that the host of its summit becomes next head. Sudan, which is under fire for rights abuses, wants to succeed Nigeria at the two-day summit that opened in Khartoum on Monday. An AU official told Reuters that 5 heads of state had met Sudanese President Omar Hassan al-Bashir on Sunday and told him there was a consensus that he should withdraw. Bashir said that he would respond after consulting his neighbors. The official said that 5 nations, including Nigeria, whose President Olusegun Obasanjo has led the AU for 2 years. Sudan has said it has the backing of North and East Africa, but diplomats say Southern, Western and Central Africa have been urging Khartoum to withdraw its nomination.
Her Majesty Queen Rania Abdallah participated in the World Economic Forum that is currently being held in Davos under the title The Need for Change. A number of state and government leaders, experts, and senior media personalities throughout the world attended the conference. In discussions of the World Economic Forum currently taking place in Davos, Queen Rania Abdallah focused on how the Islamic world is facing large challenges. She stressed the need to invest in the energies of the youth and work towards changing the image that the Islamic world is a source of terrorism, especially under the shadow of acts being carried out by groups that use Islam as a justification for their actions.
Youth are the catalyst for change, and change is the only constant. Equipping them with the right tools to compete on the international stage, I think, should be, and creating opportunities for our youth should be the overriding motivation behind anything and everything that we do.
This session, which was entitled Islamic Societies in the New World, was moderated by New York Times journalist Thomas Friedman and touched upon many issues, like the challenge of how to create a balance between the demands of the modern world and tradition in Islamic countries. Queen Rania presented the role of Jordan as a way to bring together different points of view by talking about the Amman message, which teaches the true Islam. She also spoke about the World Islamic Conference that took place in Amman last year.
We issued, as you know, in Jordan, the Amman message. And this is a message that basically emphasizes the true teachings of our religion and calls for the peaceful coexistence amongst humanity.
In a question about Jordan's priorities, Queen Rania said that education was a top priority, reiterating that the youth are the vehicle for change.
Equality is not just parity in numbers, it's also changing mindsets. For example, the Middle East and North Africa region spend amongst the biggest spenders on education. And the majority in many Middle Eastern countries of university graduates are women. But then the problem is what happens after they graduate. Their participation in the workforce is amongst the lowest in the world. So on the one hand, we're making huge investments, but we're depriving ourselves of the returns. So this is going to take a long time. It's going to take very strong leadership, very strong vision. We need to rally support at the grassroots level. As I said, at the end of the day, it's changing mindsets.
Later, Her Majesty the Queen, who was the only Arab representative in the foundation board of the World Economic Forum, participated in a meeting with members of the Youth Leadership Organization. The World Economic Forum president, Klaus Schwab, announced Queen Rania's appointment to the foundation board of the forum during a session with the youth leadership in 2004 at the Dead Sea. Her Majesty met with Mr. Klaus Schwab and members of the foundation board. She also participated in a number of sessions, which were being held this year under the title The Need for Change. They were attended by a number of state presidents, heads of government, senior business administration officials from private companies, experts, and leading media personalities throughout the world.
The views expressed on Mosaic are not those of Link TV or its sponsors, but of the broadcasters themselves. Mosaic is made possible by a grant from the John S. and James L. Knight Foundation, which promotes journalism excellence worldwide and invests in the vitality of 26 U.S. communities, and the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation. Additional support is provided by the Firedoll Foundation and Henry and Virgilia Dakin.